to our podcast series. I am Allie Harris. I've been on before with Grace and Brooke, and today I have a new special guest with me, our Director of Population Health, Sarah Michaels. So welcome, Sarah. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. As Allie knows, and for those of you who know me, mental health is very near and dear to my heart. Prior to coming to Apex, I've been in the space for over 5 years now, but I was full-time down at our local children's hospital in town where I actually served. We made the first inpatient behavioral health, and that's expanded now to the emergency room nursing. And obviously mental health, I think we need to talk about it. I am so excited for this series, and thanks for inviting me, Allie.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you for being here. We're excited. I know this will be a good little conversation. So today's episode is Behind the Mask. And kind of what we're all going through. So I think it would be fun to start with a little exercise. So Sarah, if you don't mind, I'm going to have you put on your mask.
I feel like it's everywhere I am at this point in
time. I know we are definitely in different spaces and separated, but we will have you wear your mask. So we're going to do a fun little exercise, and I'm going to ask you, and I'll kind of do the same thing. And I want you guys to just watch on our faces what you recognize and maybe what you don't recognize or kind of see. So let's both smile. Let's both frown. And we're going to act surprised and scared and maybe confused. So me watching on my screen, I can see Sarah, and you can go ahead and take your mask off. And there were a few of those different emotions where I didn't see any difference in your eyes, and I couldn't tell the difference between when you were smiling and when you were frowning. So I could tell the difference from mine. But I think it's a really good visual exercise to do to show we are now physically can't see and see some of these nonverbal communications, that the facial expressions that we really depend on to communicate. And when you look at two faces side by side, you can see very concretely some of those facial expressions. But when your mouth is covered up and half of your face, it's very hard to recognize. And we're starting to get a little bit more used to it, but not nearly probably how you're used to it being a nurse. So if you kind of want to share what your background is and how this has always been sort of normal for you, but not for the general public.
Absolutely. And it's something you just don't think about. And I really love that exercise because even as I'm watching myself on the screen with you, it's almost disappointing because I knew I was making those frowns. I knew I was smiling. And how often do we use nonverbal communication in the sense that sometimes we don't want to say a lot of words, right? Especially when somebody's talking to us and we want to be active listeners. Sometimes it's just our facial expressions that show that we're really listening and we care. And so when I'm smiling, I want you to know that I really like what you said and I'm happy. And sometimes it's just a smile. And now we actually have to verbalize that, which is hard, but you're right. And at Riley, I'd been doing that forever. When you work in a hospital, you're always in masks and you're in gloves. And so that really wasn't new to us. But what was new that people actually don't think about during a pandemic is how many times have we heard, going through school, you have your personal space, you have your little bubble, and we invite our very near and dear close friends and family into that. But then there's something called the social space, which is, that 6 feet or more apart. And now we're actually all living in that social space, whether we want to or not. And so for some of us as humans, we crave that physical touch. And with the pandemic, we can't get that as much anymore. But that was a big thing in the hospital. So when somebody came in and they're in a crisis situation, if I'm masked up and they can't see how I feel, you kind of use that space to show how you're feeling, right? To show that empathy, that warm touch. We can't do that anymore. So I think for me, it's made me so much more aware of I need to use my whole language to communicate exactly how I feel inside so that they can not only see it, but they can actually hear it. So that's, I think, really what we wanted to talk about today was, I know, Allie, you've done a lot of research about, there's a lot of studies out there with everything, but about nonverbal communication. And I think what you found was really cool to hear. And I want you to talk about, what it says. What does research show us?
Yeah, so I've looked at a lot of different things, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint one number. One study I looked at said that I think 93% of the communication that we use is nonverbal. Another one said 65% of the communication that we use between interacting with either groups or just individuals is nonverbal communication. And whether it's 93 or 65, a majority of what we do, even me speaking right now, I'm not even with you, but I'm using my hands and the nonverbal cues, that is the majority of how we are interacting with one another, can read and understand, just the nuances. And so it's this whole scenario, pandemic situation that we're in has taken away one of the key areas of the way that we communicate with one another. And, with computers not being face to face, having to do virtual meetings, the other areas of language, I know you and I had talked about this previously, is, nonverbal is a majority of that, but then we also have the words that we use, so our language, but then also another huge component is our tone. And I think that's something that can get lost in emails or text messages. And so there's another part of our language or our communication that's kind of out the door sometimes. So,
well, how many parents do we have out there that can relate to the tone right there? My goodness, how many people have kids and they might be saying something and words sound innocent on paper, but when they say it with their tone, we immediately catch on to how they feel. So I know parents can really tone right there.
Yeah, and I'm sure my mom voice can change as well to say like be quiet or be quiet. Like that tone and the way that we say things is we have to take that into major consideration even behind the mask or behind the screen to make sure that we're conveying the message and it's not misinterpreted.
Well, and the emails. I think this day and age when people are working from home, for whatever reason, we're not always comfortable picking up that phone and making a phone call, but sometimes we need to, because how many times do we get that email that, somebody else that we have read the email interprets it much different than we might interpret it. And of course, the sender, of course, doesn't mean it either. So I think the biggest thing to be learned from this nonverbal communication is never assume you know what somebody else means. It is always okay to ask for clarification. Here's how I'm interpreting this. Am I right? To make sure that the person who's sending that communication is giving you the facts behind it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I know you had talked about active listening before, and that's very easy to do when we are communicating verbally, but behind the screen or through an email, it's very hard to, you kind of have to make an extra step, an extra effort to say, okay, I'm reading this, but instead of being able to talk to the person to say, okay, what I'm hearing you say is this, sometimes it has to be an email response to it and worded in the right way to say, I'm a little confused. Can you clarify? I want to make sure we're on the same page. Maybe picking up the phone to just make sure, because I can misinterpret and think, well, they're kind of being rude, but maybe they were just in a hurry. And I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So it's in this situation that we're in, it just takes extra effort and extra steps to make sure that we are communicating efficiently, effectively, and being comfortable and confident enough to be able to reach out to each other to say, I'm struggling, or can we work on this in a different way, and kind of speaking up for yourself as well to make sure that you're having those conversations with people.
Yeah, and with that point, I want to give our listeners some really practical good news, and that is, yes, we're in a crisis situation oftentimes during this pandemic, and a lot of people think that's going to immediately create fear in people. But the truth is, a crisis can actually create such good long-term loyalty if you approach it from the proper place. And so, Allie, I know a big thing that you and I have been working about is how do we use a crisis to make us stronger as an organization? We do this a lot internally at Apex Benefits, but the biggest thing is communication. And that's really what we wanted to highlight today is, number one, coming from a place of empathy. Whether we can show our smiles or not, people understand based off of the way we're communicating, whether or not we're being empathetic. And Allie, I know for you and I, we like to be communicated with very frequently, right? The second we don't hear from somebody, our brains like to kind of fill in the gaps there for us.
Yeah, I would rather someone be sending me multiple emails or reassurance, and everybody is different. Some people get annoyed by it and just delete the emails, but I'd rather them, some people be able to just delete them and kind of put it off their plate rather than having other people feel like they're kind of left in the dark, they're made to wonder. When we're not informed or not made, like things are not made very clear to us, that's when our brains and our psyche, we really start to just snowball and we can make assumptions. And a lot of times we've created a scenario in our own head that could be very different than what either the company or the person intended for us to understand. So the more frequently we can relay messages to friends, family, coworkers, an organization, to your employees, making sure that it is, we are out there, we are in front of them, I think that is more helpful so that we can minimize some of those like snowball effects of like our negative thinking that just keeps going and going and going.
Yeah, and using the different mediums of communication, we've seen Zoom work well, we've seen Teams, there's so much out there, but I know by 4 o'clock, I'm just absolutely drained from these platforms. And so big thing at Apex is we started to do these weekly video communications, and the second I get that, it's like a wanted break in my day where, hey, I have 3 minutes that I don't have to do anything but listen. So yeah. I love that. I know for other people, they love those quick text messages. So I think using the different forms of communication that we have available is everything right now.
Yeah, and that makes me think of, before coming to Apex, I worked as an elementary counselor, and when I would go in to do classroom guidance lessons, I would have to make sure that I was presenting a lesson to the kids that hit them in all different sorts of learning styles. So some people are, they like to hear it, they're auditory. Some people are tactile, they like to feel and touch things. And it's been nice sometimes when I come in and I haven't been into the office in a while and there's something on my desk, like a card I can open or something that's just kind of there, or like a snack or treat. And some people like to read things, or they like to see it. They're the visual video. So if we are kind of hitting people with all these different mediums, we're making sure that they're getting the message and they're feeling like they're cared about and that they have the information that they need.
Yeah, and I mean, you just said it perfectly, being a counselor and being in that space before. So how you then receive feedback, I think people forget how important that is now more than ever as well. And having different forms of communication there too, right? It shouldn't just be our HR directors the only feedback. We should be able to go to different places and different mediums. And so I know for me, that's everything. As on the leadership team, we really focus on, great, we've communicated to our people, but people still have valid concerns that we need to acknowledge. So how we respond to that feedback is just as important as the message we're pushing out.
Yes, definitely, 100%. And you're creating that safe place and that environment for people to say they feel comfortable enough to tell you what's going well or what's not going well. And the way that you respond or take that is going to then open up the door for them to feel comfortable later on down the road and to come to you again, and they're feeling safe, secure. And we've talked a little bit about this, you and I, just previous to this conversation, of we are in a pretty heightened situation where 10 years, 20 years, 5 years from now, whatever the case is, we are going to remember this year. We're going to remember 2020. And we are in the moment right now where we are creating distant memories. And that's something that we can work on right now to create the safe place, to make our employees or our friends feel like, I can rely on this unit, I can rely on this person as a safe, comfortable area. It's going to kind of build that cohesiveness within the groups to say they cared about me, I felt secure, I feel like I had people who I could lean on. And that is us as humans. We need that. We need that sense of belonging and security. And we have the opportunity right now to create that space for not only our friends and families on an individual level, but as an organization and a company, we have the opportunity to make sure that our employees and our people that we see on a daily basis, or we're not able to physically see on a daily basis, that we still feel connected.
Yeah. And I like the words you just used, because as a foster parent, one thing we always focus on is creating felt safety, right? I know my home is safe, but that doesn't mean everybody knows that it's safe. How much in the beginning do we focus on protective equipment, right? PPE and making sure we have hand sanitizer. And great, we have the most robust, when you walk into our office, plan in place so everybody's safe. But that doesn't mean that I've created felt safety for my people. And felt safety is not something that you can just implement. It's something that people feel as a result of leadership and employees and how you guys are working together as a team.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is it's such a phenomenal conversation for me to have because there's so much going on when we say behind the mask. Like, yes, there's nonverbal and different things that we're having, barriers that we're having to overcome, but there's also so many things that we can just kind of hide behind. And in psychology, you've said, like, people wear a mask. Like, what face are you putting on today? What kind of things are you hiding behind or not feeling comfortable or confident enough to share with other people? And this is one of those opportunities where we can break down some of those barriers and those walls and really have, now that we've had this conversation, kind of challenging ourselves to say, in what ways am I doing that? And I can break down my own walls, but then also noticing, are there people that I'm interacting with on a daily basis that I can create that safe place for? So what are the small things to do that can create a safe place where people feel comfortable sharing and opening up?
Yeah, and as we're talking about that long term, I think that's kind of the thing we would want to leave on is how important the futuristic talk is, right? Let's not just be caught in the now, in the crisis. Let's talk about what we're going to do to get out of this crisis and how we're going to be stronger than ever. I know that some people forget right now it's really important to praise people, to talk about the good that's happening and to show the good that's happening within your own organization. Guys, we are at such a strong space, we are doing really well, and 3 years from now, here's what we're going to do as a result. People want that felt security, that there is a future plan, that we're going to come out of this crisis, and that they still have a role, and that they are important and they're needed right now.
Yes, I think that's great. And to kind of leave with it can be overwhelming to feel like we have to make these huge, big shifts and big changes to make an impact. But really the challenge that we would like to leave you guys with who are listening is it's the small things. It's the little tiny things that you can do on a daily basis that can have an impact on your own emotional state or whatever you're dealing with, but then also those just around you. So it doesn't take a big, massive shift for you to have to do, but maybe start to recognize some of those things and conversations you can maybe approach that were a little bit more uncomfortable, or just create an open, safe environment for people that you care about. So that's our challenge to you guys today. And we really appreciate you. Thank you, Sarah, for coming on today. This was a great conversation. I know we have one more session left. I think Brooke and I will be back with you guys. So again, Sarah, thank you for coming. And thanks, guys. I'll say bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye, guys.
Yeah, take care.